Everyone, we are here today to hear another couple chapters from the book 5 with our author Barak. Today we are doing a triple feature, Act 2, chapters 13, 14, and 15. Barak, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. So we have a couple of new joinees to our group. Hi, Allison and Joshua. It's lovely to have more people involved in this. And a little recap of where we ended last time. Our group has arrived at Goranta City, where they met a couple of Descentian dwarves, and we learned that there is another continent called Descentia that way, where all the dark-skinned races arrived from, and which of course caught everybody by surprise, or at least in our group, due to Lavatown's status as a kind of independent city-state that doesn't mingle much. And they ended up their day in the inn next to the city walls, where they are preparing to the next day, which we're going to start this chapter with, where Lomek and Nael are going to go and visit the Royal College. Act 2, Chapter 13, Nut and Bolts. Yes, the clerk, a middle-aged human with a neatly trimmed beard and bushy eyebrows, raised his eyes from his paperwork. Oh, hi, I'm Lomek from Lavatown. Lomek tentatively stepped into the small office. The guards told me to speak with you. Then speak. Right. I came here to get an audience. Lots of people want audiences. Is this your first interview? I haven't seen a Lomek mentioned anywhere. The clerk examined an appointment book. No Lomek. How did you even get in here? His palm hovered above a bell on his desk. Right. Lomek cleared his throat, then squared his shoulders. Brontor from the Lowland delegation then sent me to you. I guess they haven't had a chance to update the list, he said. The clerk pulled his hand into his lap. Yes, I know Brontor, he said. He looked Lomek up and down for a moment. Are you from his tribe? No, I'm from Lavatown. Lomek found the clerk's look extremely disconcerting. Right, you did say that. The clerk leaned back in his chair. You just look so much like the rest of them from over there. Got me confused. Then again, lots of you around these days, isn't it so? Bound to be some in all kinds of places. Lomek felt his face flushing. So what does a Descentian dwarf from Lavatown come to me for? I don't handle trade stuff. As Brontor knows, surely he told you that. Lomek swallowed. Yes, he did. I'm seeking an audience with a scribe. A scribe? Yes, I have something that nobody knows anything about. Something I found. I thought that maybe your scribes would be able to help figure out what it is. The clerk raised his eyebrow. Oh? And you traveled all the way out here? It's not a cheap outing. It must be very important to you. Lomek felt his body stiffen. Well, our scribes are pretty busy, as you can imagine. The clerk leaned over to pull out a notebook and opened it. Let's see. I can probably set you up for something in, say, 6 weeks. He looked up, watching Lomek's reaction. Lomek shuffled his feet. I don't have that kind of time, sir. I was wondering if I could see someone more urgently than that. The clerk closed the notebook and leaned forward. Now I'm curious. Lots of people say their business is urgent, but you seem both sincere and uncomfortable. Your clothes tell me you spent what must have been for you an enormous sum to get here. And you keep referring to yourself in the plural. So, Lomeks of Lavatown, what is so urgent to all of you? Care to show me whatever it is? Lomek closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Exhaling slowly, he reached out for an inner pocket and brought out the tightener. Taking a couple of steps forward, he put it on the desk and smiled uneasily. The clerk reached out over and picked it up, turning it this way and that as he examined it. Huh, interesting. Never seen anything like this before, he said. What is it for? What's it made of? And who's we? No idea. That's why I seek an audience, Lomek answered more confidently. And you're right, I'm not here by myself. My group would love to attend an audience if we could, but I'm the one making the petition. Indeed, the clerk said. He held the tightener down on the table, laid the tightener down on the table and gestured for Lomek to retrieve it. You don't want a scribe, you want an adept, someone who might know the purpose of this. And in that case, you're in luck because very few people seek an audience with adepts. Let me see. He grabbed another notebook and flipped through it. Yes, I can set you up with someone this afternoon. Would that work? Lomek nodded, relieved. All right then. The clerk scribbled something on a piece of paper and folded it into a small envelope, to which he applied the royal seal. Ask at the front gate for directions to the Royal College and go there mid-afternoon. Give this to the guards there. He handed the envelope to Lomek. The clerk ushered Lomek out of the room. Just as Lomek was leaving, the clerk spoke again, chuckling. Oh, and Lomek of Lava Town, tell your father Frent sends his regards, will you? And you can bring one of your friends later if you like. Maybe the elf girl? As Lomek froze, Frent laughed and closed the door behind him. So he actually knew you? Nael and Lomek were approaching the Royal College. They walked down a wide path surrounded on both sides by evenly spaced trees and well-manicured flower beds. Lomek found the effect to be calming, even inspiring. He breathed in deeply. Yeah, but it didn't let me know until the moment I left. Any idea as to how? None. My dad has plenty of visitors, of course, but they are usually from the higher shelves. I think I'd have remembered somebody like him. Lomek hesitated. Still, ever since I left, I can't shake the feeling that I do know him. Something about the way he laughed. One more mystery to add to a pile of them, then, Nael said as they reached the college gate. A well-appointed sentry stepped out. State your business, he said in a formal tone. Right. We have an appointment with an adept. Lomek handed the guard the envelope. The guard gestured towards a bench just inside the gate as he walked back into his booth. They sat down, admiring the huge courtyard and the massive building looming behind it. You could count 3 stories of its unusually tall windows, but it might well have been 6, and its watchtowers extended even higher. Tall enough to reach another shelf, Nael thought, at the very least. The top of each tower had a large round chamber surrounded by a narrow walk, and people were leaning against the parapets in conversation, smoking. A few moments later, a gnome wearing a blue robe emerged from the building and walked briskly towards them, gesturing for them to stay seated. Makes it easier to have a conversation at eye level, she winked, her blue eyes and childlike face making the statement seem whimsical. Not with me, it isn't, Lomek laughed. He jumped down from the bench and bowed slightly. I'm Lomek, and this is Nael. Charmed. I'm Zafina. Frent mentioned last night that you might be coming by. Want to go into my study and show me what you have? The gnome turned around and started to walk back towards the building. What? Wait, did you say last night? Nael asked, but Zafina was already halfway back to the building and didn't answer. I don't get many visitors, Zafina said apologetically, as she hastily cleaned up a corner of the extremely low table that filled the center of the room, moving books and papers and various items into boxes and onto chairs. The table did not have any legs, but was suspended from chains that set into the ceiling. As Zafina pushed a lever mounted into the wall, with a series of clicking noises, the table slowly rose. She pulled back on the lever, and the table halted a couple of feet higher. Zafina dragged a low bench to the raised table, climbed on it, and smiled expectantly. Exchanging glances with Nael, Lomek placed the tightener on the one clear corner of the table and stepped back. Zafina bent over to look at it before examining it closely with a magnifying glass she grabbed from a nearby pile. Oh, now that is unusual, she said appreciatively. Yes, Lomek said. We think we know what it's for, he added. And what would that be? Zafina had flipped the piece and was looking closely at the runes. Lomek and Nael exchanged another glance. Construction, he said. Mm-hmm. Zafina murmured mostly to herself. She laid the metal bit down on the table and looked at him expectantly. We found a drawing of something that might fit inside of it, and we think they are used to fasten 2 pieces of wood without having to nail them together, he continued. We call them driver and tightener. Can I see the drawing, Zafina asked. No, we had to turn it over to our boss. Zafina cocked her head at him. Fascinating, she said, then jumped off the bench and went over to a set of drawers. Opening one of them, she pulled something out. She hopped back on the bench and set down a grooved metal object. It looks just like the drawing, Nael gasped. Zafina picked up both pieces and twisted one into the other with a bit of effort. They fit. They are called nuts and bolts. The piece you brought is a nut, she beamed at them. Lomek stared at her. It's a really new technology. Your observation is correct. They are used to adjoin wood and other materials so they can be separated later without having to break them. We are still testing them out. However, she gestured for them to pick the pieces up. Lomek twisted them free and then put them back together before handing them to Nael, who copied these actions with a look of wonder. The bolt is made of iron, Zafina continued. Your piece, though, it's made of something else entirely. She held out her hand and Lomek handed her the metal bits back. She took them apart and held up the bolt. This one is really well made. I crafted it myself and it's our best so far. But it still isn't anywhere near as perfect as this nut. That's why they don't fit seamlessly. I wish I could create grooves like this, but I can't. No one can. Maybe it's magic? Nael asked. Maybe, although I doubt it. A wizard would have to spend a fair bit of time to figure out how to make something like this, and it's not the kind of thing they normally do. Not to mention that nuts and bolts are a new invention. Only a few of us here at the college even know about it, Zafina said. At least, that's what I thought. And that material, you said you come from Lavatown, right? Where did you find this? It's a long story, Lomek demurred. Do you know what the runes say? We thought it might be an indication of size, so you can tell which bolt, he felt the new word with his tongue, fits with which nut. But we've never seen this language before. That's likely correct, Zafina nodded. I know that language, but let me ask you something first. The drawing you had, did it have some of those runes too? Could you read anything on it at all? Yes to both, Nael answered. Zafina looked at Nael patiently. It had some of these runes next to the drawing of the bolt in the center, and someone had written the word manual at the top. She thought for a second, but it was added on in pencil. The page itself was written in a very fine script, which was extremely regular, like no book any of us had ever seen. No deviations at all. Every letter looked identical to any other similar letter. That's why we thought it might be magical, like a page from a wizarding manual or something. Logical conclusion, especially if you've never seen a wizarding book before, Zafina chuckled, but no. The word manual refers to it being an instruction book. Around here, adepts create these to allow us to understand each other's work. It sounds like your page was from a book like that, but not one of ours. Hold on a second. She jumped off the bench to retrieve a scroll case. She pulled a couple of scrolls from it and then unrolled them on the table, pointing. Like this? Nael and Lomek leaned over, then stood up and nodded their heads. Interesting. Very interesting, Zafina said. From all I can tell, it's the same script. What is it then? Do they speak it in Descendia? Is that where it's from? Nael asked. Oh no, Zafina shook her head. We're a lot more civilized than they are over there in Descendia. No. The runes are numbers, and the script itself is written in a language that is from another world entirely. Another world? Nael's voice betrayed her amazement. Yes, Zafina nodded vigorously. We don't know much about it, but for well over a century, we've collected a small assortment of bits and pieces that must have come from it. That nut you brought is made from a metal which we believe is called steel. We have a couple of other steel pieces under guard in the royal treasury. She picked up the nut again, twisting it in her palm reflectively. The material is much stronger than anything we know how to make. We think it's still primarily made of iron, but we have no idea how to turn iron into this. Its load-bearing capabilities are so much better than anything we know of, even the huge jade and diamond reinforcements they use to build Stonebridge. Zafina stopped, considering something, then spoke up again. Most of these pieces had been smuggled out of Lavatown. Nael and Lomek looked at her in confusion. You've never considered all the strange things about Lavatown? Zafina asked in a tone that betrayed her surprise. Well, not really, Lomek said. I suppose the flying ships are weird, Nael piped in. Just the ships? What about the shelf system? What do you think is holding it all up? And the volcano, you know it's active, right? Zafina demanded. Lomek stared at her. I thought it was, magic? That would be some magic, Zafina laughed. Sure, you can place wards on stone to make it stronger, although these shells would require a lot of wizards and a ton of magic. Even then, no magic anybody knows of can save you from melting in the middle of an erupting volcano. You do know that it has erupted at least 3 times in as many centuries, right? They shook their heads. Surely you must. The lowest shelf, the shallows, right? They nodded. It has been taken by flame every single time, hasn't it? The last one wasn't more than 20 years ago. The 2 of you must have been alive then. You mean the big fire? I lost my mom in that one, Nael whispered, her eyes glistening. But I always thought the volcano didn't actually erupt. Yes, Lomek said, everybody knows the mountain was just releasing some steam. My dad says we should be grateful for it, and even an actual eruption would wipe everything out. Zephyna looked at them in amusement. Oh, it erupted all right, or it should have anyway. The lava went out into the ocean instead and created a whole fresh supply of those crazy rocks, you know, the ones floating around and flying about in the stone storms. We felt the resulting tremor all the way out here in the capital. I was around for the previous one too. Stormbridge is the only reason the peninsula stays attached to the continent, actually. It gets pretty violent out there, especially at the chasm when the volcano erupts. Nael and Lomek looked at her helplessly. All right, you two, I'm not going to press you anymore about how you got a hold of the nut, but I am going to keep it. If you need to see it, you can always come visit me, but it's no use to you, and it's definitely of use to my research, Zephyna said. Don't worry, you will be amply rewarded. Take this. And she handed them an official-looking slip of heavy parchment. The treasury office near the town center will give you 100 gold for it. 100 gold? Nael gasped. Yes, I know it's not very much, but it's the most I'm authorized to pay out for even rare finds like this one. Is it not enough? They nodded, dumbfounded. Super! Zephyna picked up the nut and jumped off the bench. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of work to finish, she said. Can you see yourselves out? They turned to leave, but then Nael stopped. Wait, what about the runes? You never told us what language they are. Oh, right. Zephyna turned her head towards them and smiled. We believe it's called English.
And that's the end of that chapter.
That's the end of that chapter, correct.
We learned a lot about nuts and bolts. I felt I'm like in a fantasy Home Depot in the middle of, yeah. Interesting.
Multiverse collision.
Yes.
That might be like that should be the name of the book.
It could be a subtitle.
Yeah, I'm curious about the last night comment.
Yeah. Mhm.
That was like cities of like last night.
Yeah. Nael was curious about it too.
Yeah,
Something doesn't work.
something's not working.
That was a big mic drop with English.
Right.
Yeah.
You got in at the right moment, basically.
I was like, oh.
Yeah. I was waiting for that.
Doesn't know.
I would ask questions, but I'm assuming that parts of that are going to be explained in
No, feel free to ask questions. I want
in
to tell you things that I don't need to tell you.
chapter 14.
Perhaps not. We'll see. What are the questions? Ask them.
So around the nuts and bolts and the pieces coming through, like effectively what's the significance of that? I'm assuming we're going to figure that out as we continue the journey.
Sure. Yeah. So we know that this world suddenly sees things that this world has never seen, and they appear to all come from Lava Town. The things are things like nuts and bolts, and steel, which is well beyond the capability of anybody in this world to create. Nobody understands how to create steel. So it cannot possibly have been, or at least in their. I don't want to use these words. It is in their understanding that it comes from somewhere else. And the English language, we know exactly which other world it comes from, right? So this is perhaps the first time that we get an inkling that that Earth is connected to this world somehow, right? And that's the mic drop moment. Right?
Yeah.
This is the part of the story where there's like okay, this may not be just a traditional fantasy book. There may be something else going on. Perhaps there's a mystery. So this is perhaps the first time that you get a sense that in reality it's not a fantasy book, it's a mystery book hiding in fantasy clothes.
Okay, say everything you just said that I missed, please.
Somebody else wants to summarize? So I see that people are engaged. I don't know.
English Earth mystery, not quite fantasy.
No one knows how to make steel because coal is not a thing with the metallurgy technology.
Right.
And I think there's a portal between somewhere.
But it's not necessarily a time travel, but it's more of a portal travel thing.
Maybe.
No. Like there's multiple paths because right now all of them are equal. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat.
wiped itself out in our.
But there are now mysteries, right? So,
The story is a fantasy wrapped in an enigma, smothered in special sauce.
exactly right.
Secret sauce.
After we destroyed it.
What?
It just rebuilt Earth after we've destroyed it and we left some stuff behind.
There we go. Yeah.
I love all the theories. I mean, I've now heard, I think, roughly a dozen different theories from the group. None of them is right, by the way, which is
No, no,
fantastic.
great.
Okay.
I'm also-
Unless
Yeah.
one of them
also
is
to
and you're
say,
just lying.
You know, I would have been more surprised if the manual was in Italian and not in English. But because those
Yeah.
fuckers never write anything about anything, like you have to just figure it out.
Fair enough.
That would be a rare funny.
I apologize for my lack of imagination.
It would be funny if like various parts of it were like different languages using the Latin alphabet.
Like an IKEA manual.
Yeah, so you have an IKEA manual, English on, one thing,
There you go.
on the other. Just random.
Then you could have an IKEA furniture name joke.
Hey, I've got to tell you, Barack, I like Lomac.
What?
I like
Lor-
Lomac, the
Lomac.
character.
Uh,
Lomac. And I've made a drink in his honor.
Oh,
Oh, the Lormac?
it's called
Is
the
it, is
Lomac?
It's good bourbon, not crap, Cointreau and lime.
I love it.
Oh,
That's incredible.
Yeah.
When we have the, I mean, I probably should mention this at some point. I finished the book, so 5 is finished.
Will you please remind me of the character's name who can bend sound?
Nael.
Oh, yeah.
That's what he's with right now.
Yeah. Yeah, she gets a special drink.
Okay, awesome. I think you need to make special drinks for all of them when we do like a little party.
And importantly, you have to make them for us,
Yes.
not just for yourself. That's
Right.
not working. For
I look forward to that day.
All righty. Shall we move on to the next one? Let's move on. Act 2, chapter 14, Gone Ghost. Niall and Lormek did not speak with each other until they received their reward, walking in stunned silence as they collected their thoughts. Lormek kept thinking back to his upbringing. Brontor and Grinta were clearly right, now that he could see the evidence all around him. He was born somewhere in Descentia. But why couldn't he recall anything from his childhood? Was he adopted so young that it was beyond his memories? And what happened to his birth family? He had absorbed enough about his kind the previous day to note that the sentient dwarves do not easily give up on their kin. Did his whole family die? And how did he end up in Lava Town of all places? Grinta had explained that the tall clans of the north did not just keep to themselves, but also never sailed, believing that bodies of water, anything more than a puddle really, were divine warnings that should be heeded closely. But even beyond all these questions, something else was nagging at him. Something that he felt in his bones, yet no matter how hard he tried, he could not figure it out. Worse, every time he tried to think through it at all, his discomfort grew and he ultimately found himself thinking about Solace instead. It was becoming an obsession and it made him uneasy. He couldn't wait to speak to his father about it all. To Nael's efficient, detail-obsessed mind, there were too many coincidences in the stories they'd been told. She thought back to their introduction to Brad and his story about recruiting them for their special gifts. She wasn't so sure if she believed him anymore. For one thing, Brad didn't seem particularly interested in the page they gave him. That spoke to the conspiracy and the Popades' involvement, and for all she could tell, it was their combination of unique skills that allowed them to pull off the heist. But Brad shrugged it off, and when they told him they were traveling to the city, he almost seemed relieved. Yet somehow, at least some people in the city were expecting them to arrive when they did. Didn't the adept say that she was told they were coming last night? But Lomek had only visited with friends this morning. Zephyna's comments about the nut being from another world and of the strangeness of Lava Town stuck with Nael too, as did the memory of Lomek's disembodied figure accosting Solace. Something was definitely off, and she was determined to find out what it was. Should we pause?
No.
The bored sentry who exchanged the parchment for 2 small bars of gold embossed with Emeka's profile, the preferred form of payment apparently for that amount, didn't even look up at them. As soon as he paid Nael, he hung a closed sign in the window and closed it. Nael held the gold bars in her hand in disbelief. The amount of wealth they represented was so vast that she could scarcely imagine it. She reminded herself that it was not unusual in this place and closed her eyes for a moment before turning towards Lomek. He was standing there shaking slightly, his face drained of color. Lomek? She asked. His eyes rolled into the back of his head and he tumbled to the ground. Here, drink this. Nael offered Lomek a steaming cup. Shaking, he raised it to his lips and took a sip. What is this? He asked, making a face. An herbal tea my mom taught me how to make. I found the herbs for it on the way out here, so they're fresh. It will settle your stomach. Now tell me, what's wrong? They were sitting at a corner table in the inn where they had met Brontor and Grinta. The room was mostly empty at this hour. Yeah.
That's right.
The room was mostly empty at this hour, but it was starting to fill up as patrons were slowly coming in at the end of their day's business. Lomek took another sip and winced. I hope you're right. It tastes awful, he said. Nael pushed a plate with buttered bread towards him. Eat something, she said. Are you sick? You still look very pale. Lomek shook his head. Not sick, no, or at least I don't think so. So what happened to you? You pretty much fainted outside the office with no warning, Nael demanded. Lomek took a bite of bread and chewed slowly. It's hard to explain, he said finally. Everything is hard to explain with you, so that's nothing new, Nael responded. We've been through enough together that I sort of expect it. All right, but promise me you won't get upset, Lomek pleaded. Nael raised her eyebrow. It's about Solace. I suddenly felt, he paused and took a deep breath. I felt like she was gone. Gone? Yes, you know how I told you about her being like ghost limb? Nael nodded cautiously. Well, it felt like I lost it. Her, the limb. Like suddenly, whatever piece of me she represents disappeared. It happened suddenly and was really shocking. Nael sat back and looked at him. Are you telling me that you can sense her from a distance? She asked, measuring her words. Lomek lowered his eyes. Yes, he mumbled. I think I can. Wow, things just got a whole lot more weird, Nael murmured. Anything else? No, but Nael, she still feels gone, Lomek said weakly. Wait, what? They are all back in our room waiting for us. Or are you saying she's not? It was Lomek's turn to nod. Nael jumped up from her chair. Well, then we have to go and find out immediately. She placed a couple of coins on the table, then strode outside. Lomek stood up, shoving another piece of bread in his mouth. He was not as eager, however, to take a last sip of Nael's tea. Tastes just awful, he muttered, and followed her outside. Returning to their rented room, Nael and Lomek were stopped short by the proprietor, a short and stocky human, only a few inches taller than Lomek. You better be leaving, he said. We would like to get to our room, please, Nael said, then added, we did pay for 3 nights in advance. That won't even begin to cover the restoration costs, the proprietor growled as he signaled to the 2 bouncers who were overlooking the main bar area. They approached warily, their hands resting on the hilts of their short swords. Restoration costs? That friend of yours, the tall one, almost burned down the whole building. If I'd known she was a wizard, I wouldn't have let you in at all. Too many accidents when wizards get tipsy, the proprietor looked up at Nael. So you better leave. There's nothing left here for you. Nael looked at Lomek in surprise, then turned back to the proprietor. What about our friends then, she asked. Gone, taken. The city watch came prepared, but I think one of them died in the explosion. Guards? Explosion? Nael was incredulous. Look, she said, reaching into her bag. The bouncers backed into fighting stances, half drawing their swords. Nael smiled at them, keeping her posture relaxed. We'd really like to see the room if we can. Maybe we can find a clue we can use to find our friends. What's the total damage? I'd estimate 15 gold to fix everything up, the proprietor said, looking at her up and down. Unless you just sold a crate of Robin cigarettes, I can't imagine you'll cover it. Nael pulled out a gold bar. Got change? Holy shit, Nael muttered. The room looked like a piece of meat that had only been cooked on one side. The floor, walls, and ceiling next to the entry were darkened, as if they were charred over an open flame. The other half of the room was untouched. The scorch marks ended abruptly at an invisible line separating the 2 halves, and debris from the shattered bunks spoke of its struggle. Lomek moved his hands carefully over the wall. They aren't quite burned, he said. Solis must have used one of her shockwaves. He rubbed hard on the spot. Yes, it comes off. Didn't the owner say somebody died? Nael asked. He did, but I'm not sure how much he actually knew. She told us she can knock people back pretty good with these shockwaves, but it shouldn't kill them outright. Unless they got smashed into something. Nael knelt by the wall, examining what was left of the beds. Look at this. These beds were broken by something shoved into them with a lot of force, or someone. Nael stood up. Sorry, Lomek walked over and kneeled down next to Nael. He picked up a piece of wood and turned it slowly in his hand. Damn, he said, there's definitely blood on this. So what do you think happened afterwards? Nael stood up. You said you felt like she was suddenly gone, right? How gone? Like dead or something else? Lomek thought for a moment. No, or at least I don't think so. More like cut off suddenly from me. Cut off from me, he breathed, feeling his cheeks getting warm. Cut off. Huh. I wonder what, Lomek asked. I wonder if they had some way to muzzle her, like her magic. Didn't the owner say that they came prepared? What did he mean by that? Lomek looked at her. I thought he just meant that they were ready for a struggle or something. You think it was something else? What if they had come in full knowledge of her powers and brought some device that could stop her magic? Nael responded. Couldn't they just tie her up? I'm starting to think that maybe she is a lot more dangerous than any of us realized. I mean, just look at this room, Nael gestured around. And if they knew about her, they would bring something to counter her. I know I would, Nael concluded. Just like the clerk, Lomek said quietly. Excuse me? Like Frent, Lomek said. You know, the clerk at the palace. He knew me, remember? He knew all of us, actually. Seems like all sorts of people know about us, Lomek added. Nael gave a big sigh. Just when I thought it couldn't get any creepier. Their investigation complete, they took leave of the inn and its suddenly deferential proprietor. The city shone with the setting sun, painting everything with a reddish glow. So what do we do now? Nael wondered aloud, as she found herself absent-mindedly listening to the faint echoes of their steps in the now much emptier streets. They could hear bits of conversation coming from the buildings around them as people were setting in for the evening. We need to figure out where they've been taken, Lomek responded with a heavy heart. He felt weighed down with the pain from a deep loss that he didn't understand. While he wouldn't admit it out loud, he felt like he was slowly losing his mind, his thoughts constantly distracted by images of Solis. He cleared his throat. I guess we could go back to the royal grounds and see if Frent will see us again. Not a bad idea, Nael said, also sounding distracted. Suddenly, they heard a loud crack from their left. They both stopped and looked, and Lomek pulled out his dagger, but there was nothing there. A split second later, Nael chuckled. I have no idea I could do that, she said. Do what? You know how I can shape the sound of my voice or an instrument I'm playing? Lomek nodded. Well, turns out I can do it with any sound around us. That crack was your footstep, amplified and then thrown against that building, she pointed. I wasn't really doing it intentionally, but my mind has been obsessing over the echoes, and I think it just figured out what to do with them. Here, check this out. Nael closed her eyes for a few seconds in concentration. Then, as she opened them, he heard the child asking his mother for dinner in the empty air right in front of him. Lomek jumped in surprise. See, Nael smiled. That happened right there. She pointed at the two-story building where the crack had come from. And I was able to hear the sound, catch it before it died, bring it here and make it louder. Lomek looked at her. Does it mean you can also hear things magically like Solis? Nael shook her head. No, I don't think so. I just always had good hearing. But this is an interesting thing to learn. I never realized this was possible with all sounds, not just mine. I wonder what else you can do, Lomek said. Me too. And judging by the last few weeks, I have a feeling we'll find out soon enough, Nael responded. Anyway, let's stay at the place we met Brontor and Grinta and see if we can get an urgent audience tomorrow. Interlude. Another dream for Lomek. We love those, right? What happened to them? Lomek closes his eyes and tries to focus his mind on prayer, but for the first time in his life, he can't find solace in Thor. His mind keeps slamming against the void, the emptiness that fills him now. It is so vast that for the first time in his life, it has displaced his shame. What happened to her? Now all he feels is desire. Nael's rhythmic, shallow breaths come from above. He admires her ability to stay calm through everything that's happened, and as he floats up near the ceiling, smiles in appreciation at her sleeping form. Oh, there she is. His eyes shift to Solace, who is suddenly there, hovering next to his motionless body lying in the lower bunk. Relief washes over him like cool water on an extremely hot day. He opens his mouth to greet her, but she can't hear him. Instead, she gazes down at his sleeping body, and he finds himself stuck, unable to move from his vantage point above. It makes him uncomfortable. With no warning, her eyes shoot two thin rays of magic color at him, the other him, the one on the bed, and it engulfs him. A moment later, he stares in horror at his own corpse, the rotting flesh slowly melting off its bones. It happens slowly at first, then faster and faster until only a gleaming skeleton remains, grinning hideously. And then the skeleton collapses and the bones turn into dust. Solace raises her head to him, smiles, and vanishes. They were getting ready to leave the following morning when a knock sounded on the door. Exchanging a quick glance, Lomax stood up and pulled out his dagger while Nael opened the window and stood next to it, ready to jump out. Who is it? It's Grinta. Open up, you guys. It's important, came the response in a familiar voice. Grinta? Lomax rushed to usher her in. What are you doing here? She looked at him, then at Nael. Close the window, will you? It's a bit chilly, she said and sat down. We guessed you might stay here, she added. Brontor already left, but I stayed behind so I could tell you in person. Leave. Just go back to Lavatown. What? Why? Nael asked. You're not safe here, Grinta said, looking around. Where are the others? Lomax sat down. They disappeared yesterday. We think they may have been arrested. Grinta nodded. That would make sense. It would? Yes, listen, did you ever get your interview? We did, yes. Thank you so much for setting it up for us, Lomax smiled. Huh? You already had it? Grinta said in surprise. Yes, we did, yesterday, first thing in the morning, Lomax said. We thought you made it happen like you told us. Grinta stared at him. We did, yesterday, during our first break in trade talks, like we told you we would. She looked at Lomax. You were supposed to just go in yesterday around lunch and confirm your appointment for today. Yes, that's what we thought too, but then I went over and they just let me in. Lomax's voice trailed off. Grinta raised her bushy eyebrows. I mean, the royal court has been far friendlier towards us since Emeka, but that's practically unheard of. Who did you see? He said his name was Frent, Lomax said. Grinta sat bolt upright. You saw Frent?
Yeah, I'm totally lost. You have to keep going.
What?
You have to keep going.
I have to keep going?
Yes, now.
Dun, dun, dun.
No breaks ever.
Sorry.
Cliffhanger.
You can't have a drink of any. So.
Just go. All right. Anybody else wants to say anything, or do we just say go?
Go for it.
Go. Act 2, Chapter 15, Talisman.
If there are illustrations in the book, you have to do a laser eyes Nael for this part.
That's got to be
Oh,
one.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, actually, is there like something that like marks that there's the next change in scene and all that? Because it is.
Yes.
Okay, good.
There is.
Okay.
It's just that I'm hoping that my pauses help
Yeah.
understand.
I
this.
was just wanting to make sure, like, within the actual book.
That's why I also use like the interlude for the dream, right? You know, that's then I take a very long pause after that, so like to communicate that it's over. It's a challenge of reading versus like hearing. Act 2, Chapter 15, Talisman. Okay, you two, that's as far as I go. The sun was setting, glowing red at its zenith. Kuri, the little moon, was already climbing, giving off an eerie shade of blue, and the crescent of Ani, the big moon, was starting to show behind it. Nael and Lomax rose from the wagon and stepped down to the road. The farmer smiled at them and pointed. Keep heading that way. If you walk through the night, you should be at the bridge by crossing time tomorrow. Just be careful till you get there. They say it's safer on the other side. Lomax smiled at the farmer, who tipped his hat before starting his cart again, heading southwards toward the coast. Lomax looked at Nael. I'm not used to being treated so normally, he smiled sheepishly. I hear ya. One of your kind on the throne, who knew? Nael responded. And what a turn of events. Frent being the king's pope, then pretending to be a clerk just so he could meet with you? She shook her head. I know we've been going over it for hours, but I'm still utterly baffled by all this. Tell me about it, Lomax sighed. So, do you think the city watch is looking for us as well? I mean, I'm glad we could hitch a ride with that fella and avoid the caravans, but I'm wondering how cautious we need to be. Honestly, I don't think so, but like we agreed, better safe than sorry, which means, shall we get off the road? Yes, Lomek said, we probably should. It's gonna be a long night. They only stopped a couple of times for a short rest and generally stuck to fields still in view of the main road. As night fell, they made wide berths around caravan company camps, and now as dawn broke, they made a similar detour to avoid the camps of caravans heading the other direction into Karanta city. They were going around a large hill in the lightly wooded area, away from tended fields and farms nearer to Karanta city. Entering a large clearing, Nael stopped. We should take another break. My legs are killing me, she yawned. Don't do that, Lomek laughed and promptly proceeded to yawn as well. Good idea. Plus, all this walking has made me hungry. They sat down on a small mound of dirt near the center of the clearing. Don't let me lay down or I swear I'll fall asleep on the spot, Nael grunted as she took a swig from her water skin. I don't think you will. Lomek's tone was suddenly grave. Nael raised her head in surprise, then followed his gaze as he stood up deliberately, drawing his dagger. Entering the clearing was the largest wolf she had ever seen. It was taller than Lomek. Its eyes were strangely intelligent, watching their movements patiently, as if it were assessing them. Even as big as it was, its head was almost comically large, and she caught herself chuckling before the cold realization hit her. They were going to die here. The wolf moved slowly, deliberately towards them, walking at a bit of an angle. She could swear that the wolf did it on purpose, readying itself to cut off any possible retreat. Then it opened its mouth, its huge fangs gleaming in the rapidly fading moonlight. It flicked its tail once, twice, seemingly in anticipation. Nael couldn't help but be struck by the incredible notion that the wolf was grinning at them. She unthinkingly grasped her lute, taking comfort from its familiar shape. One of the strings hummed softly as it brushed against her fingers. The wolf moved closer, clearly monitoring their movements. Lomek threw his dagger at it. He threw it hard and his aim was true, and the dagger hit squarely in the neck below the creature's ear. Lomek's powerful muscles ensured that it was a devastating, deadly blow, and it would have surely killed the wolf outright, were it a normal wolf. Instead, they watched in horror as the dagger rebounded harmlessly. The loathsome creature shook its head slightly, and, in the most terrifying manner that Nael could imagine, it proceeded to wink at them. It has to be a werewolf, Lomek murmured. Just like Aidan said, I would never have believed it if I hadn't seen it. He took a deep breath and turned to look at Nael. There's nothing we can do. I just want to let you know that I really love the time we spent together. You are my friend. Then he turned back, sank to his knees, and held the symbol of Thor tightly to his chest, praying in a language that she had never heard. The werewolf was taking its time, clearly enjoying the moment. It took another couple of steps towards them. It was not even 20 feet away now, and she knew it could cover the distance in a single leap. But it just stood there, twitching its tail. It's playing with us, Nael whispered in awe, then repeated it much more loudly, as if she couldn't believe her own words. It's playing with us. Lomek's prayer became louder. He spoke a series of strange words rapidly in a rising crescendo. Both she and the wolf stared at him in puzzlement. Then, without warning, lightning shot through the clear sky and struck the huge beast. Its agonized scream would continue to visit Nael's nightmares for years. The werewolf was thrown back to the edge of the clearing, its fur igniting instantly. Its howls of pain and rage made it clear this was no longer a game. It was hurt and desperately rolled on the ground to put out the fire. Let's go, Nael screamed and bolted, but then stopped cold. Lomek was lying on the ground, motionless, his hands still clasping his holy symbol tightly. Her mind in a whirl, Nael knelt down next to him, crying and shaking him violently. Don't you die on me, you idiot! You saved my life! You can't die, do you hear? Her vision blurred as tears streamed down her cheeks, and she tried to lift and pull him away, but he was far too heavy. She stood up, trembling, choking on her tears. How was I supposed to know? She whispered, before turning to run. The wolf had recovered and was standing right next to her. Its fur mostly gone, smoke rising from its body. It opened its mouth with a deep, angry growl. Game over, she thought. Reflexively, without knowing why, her fingers started moving. She played her lute. She could see what happened next as if she were an outsider watching the scene unfolding in front of her. Terrified and half blinded with tears, Nael's hands moved of their own accord, strumming the lute with urgency. The tune wasn't pleasant. Indeed, it was angry, hurtful, a song of blood and battle. Even as it played, the sound became one that no string instrument could ever produce, turning into a demented, malevolent note that seemed to take physical shape. It matched the growl of the werewolf, only it was 1,000 times harsher and more violent. The wolf leaped. She could sense the invisible fist that expanded from her lute, tearing through the air rapidly. Nael remembered later that it was eerily quiet, as if the sound reshaped itself into a physical weapon. The fist shattered against the wolf, striking it heads on, and the beast flew back, landing heavily on its charged back. The injured wolf bounced once and yelped in agony before slowly rising to its feet. It scratched at the ground and growled. Nael collapsed on her knees, more exhausted than she thought possible, the lute falling slowly to her side, her head falling to her chest. Using all of her willpower, grunting at the effort, she lifted her head slowly. Right in front of the werewolf, where its impact had left a small furrow, a white light began to shine. It brightened rapidly. Nael squinted, and through the light, she saw the wolf's eyes widen in fear and something like recognition. Then the light became blinding, and she could no longer see at all. Well then, she heard herself say before she lost consciousness and fell over on Lomek. When they both woke up, the clearing was quiet, and the sun shone over the horizon. They picked themselves up awkwardly. What happened? Lomek asked. Aren't we dead? No, Nael shook her head. She stopped quickly, grimacing. Ow, my head hurts, she said. All I remember is praying to Thor really hard, then blacking out, Lomek said. Nael stood up, her head swimming. Well, Thor for sure answered your prayer. A lightning bolt appeared out of nowhere and struck the werewolf, she said, brushing herself off. Whoa, really? I don't know what to say. I had no idea that would happen. Lomek rose up as well. And then what? Did the wolf die? He looked around the clearing, searching for the body. Nael shook her head again slowly and winced. Damn, I'm gonna have to keep my face straight for a while, she muttered, then added more loudly. No, it didn't. These things are tough, aren't they? Anyway, keeping her head up, she reached down carefully to pick up her lute. It jumped me. It jumped you? Lomek sounded incredulous. He stepped around in front of her, looking up at her, and she couldn't help but be struck by the genuine concern showing on his face. But you're still here. So what happened then? I played a tune. It was ugly, nasty, mean. I don't know what it was exactly, but in a way, it worked like the thing I did on the street back in the city, but much more powerful. Like I threw the sound at it, Nael sighed. You threw the sound at it and it got hurt? Yeah, it flew back over there, Nael pointed towards where the wolf had crashed to the ground, but I didn't manage to kill it either. So then it got up again and what? Some strange light came from the ground and I think it scared it away. I kind of blacked out too at that point. Lomek walked over and bent down. After a minute of searching in the dirt, he picked something off the ground. He turned it around in his palms. Gotta be this, he said. Nael walked over. What is it, she asked. Lomek showed her a small, plain-looking silver trinket on a chain. It looked like 3 tiny heads beside one another, of a rat, a wolf, and a bear. What a strange thing, she said. I wonder if it's one of those rare magical things that Aidan told us about at camp. Oh, you mean a talisman? Lomek exclaimed. That will definitely explain it. They are pretty magical, aren't they? Nael nodded. We should give it to him when we find him. He'll know. He seemed pretty obsessed with them, he said. So how are you feeling then? Nael asked. A little woozy, but otherwise all right, he responded. How about you? Can you keep going? Jogging most of the way, they managed to reach the bridge right at closing, and with a bit of gold convinced the stormtrooper in charge of the pedestrian gate to let them through. They still had to hurry, as the waters were rising fast, already lapping at the ends of Stormbridge's arch. Walking away afterwards, Lomek spoke. You know, I was half wondering if they were going to arrest us. Why? Nael asked. Well, the City Watch came after the other 3, right? And we were working together. Nael paused. I suppose that's fair, but I've been thinking about it. Garrett was a stowaway and an escaped prisoner. Aidan actually killed one of the guards, and Solace, we saw the room. Even if she wasn't going to be taken in, the explosion she triggered would have led to her arrest. Unless they knew about the office break-in, you and I have done nothing wrong. True, Lomek acknowledged. Still, seeing as how they knew us back at the palace, Nael, what happened to our friends? What do we do when we get back? There are so many questions, he sighed heavily. Nael squeezed his shoulder. That's for sure. Too many. Then she stopped. I can't really think about this anymore, though. I'm totally spent. Why don't we camp for the night? Good idea, Lomek responded. I doubt we'll see werewolves on this side of Stormbridge. He smiled and pointed in an area slightly off the path. Why don't we set up over there? I'll go fetch us firewood and maybe some fresh dinner. As he turned to leave, Nael spoke up. Hey, Meg, I'm really glad you're alive.
Yeah. Thank you. Question.
Yes.
Is that Aiden's talisman?
We will find out.
Well. Okay, I'm not asking you more questions.
Question about what happened.
It might be Aiden's talisman. I mean, there's a reason I mentioned Aiden's talisman before, so it's fair to assume that I am finally starting to connect back into those stories, right? Also, the werewolf recognizing the talisman probably hints to you that it's the same werewolf,
It is definitely.
right? And so, yes, there's definitely a link there. So it is a reasonable assumption.
The trashed room was very alive. Like, what was the line about meat?
Oh, it's like a half-cooked piece of meat.
Yeah. Like, you didn't need to say anything else. Like, we got it.
Greg, I saw kind of in the corner of my eye a lot of reactions from you.
Well, I'm glad you brought the werewolf back in. Going back to actually one of the examples of what I think Corey and I were talking about earlier, for me, when they were in the burned out place and Lurmak picked up a piece of wood, for me, the way I need to kind of visualize just a little addition of picked up a piece of wood about 1.5 feet long or whatever it is, it helps me visualize the scene. And then you said, notice there was blood on it, and then wait. So those little things, I don't know how many. I don't know if you're worried about like too many pages, too many words, and that kind of stuff. But I think I told you one-on-one, more description and more words helps me because I'm not as creatively visual as most people. I don't know. But I'm really glad you brought the werewolf back in, and it's the same character. The way you were describing Nael's and Lormak's perception of the werewolf was exactly the perception that you presented a chapter and a half ago. One thing that you didn't want to do in this one was present the werewolf's perception of the scene, which would have been really cool because you did that the first time, and that's what resonated with me was, holy shit, he's talking about the werewolf's perception of the baby and the placenta and that kind of stuff. And it sure wouldn't have taken away from it if you did that this time too, the werewolf's perception with it, especially when it got hit by lightning. And what the fuck was that? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
And why did it happen? And I don't know if you did it on purpose, but there's a lot of unanswered questions on that scene. That whole scene.
Right, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm going to give you the same answer I gave before. There's a limit to how much description I can add, not just in terms of the size of the book, but because there's a limiting factor in the story that you just don't know.
Okay, I'll take that, and I'll be quiet on that. But one thing, I'm a little confused
I can add
about.
the thing about the wood. That's easy. Those little things are fine. And I love the comment about the adverbs definitely needs to be cleaned up, but there's a limit to just how descriptive I can get. There's an actual self-imposed control for a reason.
No, that's cool. And I for one will trust in that. I was a little confused about how the scene ended with the werewolf and the two characters. I don't think I.
Do you remember what happened in the werewolf chapter, which was 15 chapters ago?
I remember like there was the baby being born and the placenta, and he was like really after that.
Talisman did this like explosion thing, which it did again here, and then the werewolf ran away because he couldn't withstand it. that happened. It's the same thing. I'm echoing exactly the same scene that happened there. The way that it ended there, it ended here.
Like, okay, because in this one, he got hit by lightning, he rolled around, put himself out because it was on fire. I'm on fire. But but then there was more to it. I mean, then he came back around and was menacing, and Niall came through with her like music thing, and like, I'm going to kick your ass, I'm going to punch you, and all this stuff with my music stuff. And then it took a lot out of her, and she passed out, right?
Well, before she passed out, she saw the talisman light up in that white aura, like it happened in the werewolf chapter, and then she passed out. But you can assume that he ran away, just like he did last time.
God, I didn't get that connection either.
I didn't get that connection either,
Yeah.
but now that you
That's probably
No,
because
put it
of the
together.
way that we're doing this, right? You know, when we read the werewolf chapter was 3 or 4 months ago, I think. You know, so
werewolf just showed up.
Hello, werewolf.
Oh,
I do assume that if somebody were to read this, right, or listen to it more sequentially rather with these big gaps,
Yes.
that we have, then they would like make the connection more easily because it would remind them. It's an echo of that scene. It's in fact described specifically to trigger that sense of an echo of that scene.
Yeah, and that's a very good point in that, like, if someone's reading this or listening to it, there's not going to be a month between these two chapters.
Or 4 months in this case. I mean, this was Werewolf is one of the earliest chapters, right?
Is that the one where Aiden's dad dies?
No, that's the one, that's the
No.
first one with the
That's the
relatives.
first one.
Yes, it's the one. It's the one. Yes, it is the one where Aiden's dad. No, we're talking. So there's multiple chapters. The werewolf chapter is the one that precedes the Aiden chapter.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's the one where the werewolf is tracking this woman who's pregnant. Remember that thing?
No,
Yes,
Yeah.
That-
He's
that was
tracking.
the best chapter.
He is tasting the what he was tasting the smell he's getting, drooling. I remember that one. See, I was paying attention.
Yeah, so that scene ends with the talisman doing the same exact thing it did here, which is putting this, whatever this white aura is that apparently chases this werewolf away, and then the werewolf runs away, which is exactly what happens then. Same thing.
Yes.
So I wonder if there's a slightly more natural way to get her started on the lute.
Okay.
Because you said she was kind of unthinkingly strumming it, but
Okay.
I don't know, maybe she could drop it or something while she's running away, and it makes a noise when she drops it or something.
Think through it. This was very like what the scene looked like for me.
Okay.
She's already had it out, right? She pulls it out at the beginning, then she's holding it in her hand. See what I mean? It's like it seems to be like the natural thing for it to happen next. She's not thinking about it, but it's like that's her reaction.
Okay.
You know, them, because the whole, so far, everything has been about discovering the depths of their powers, like figuring out what they're capable of. So
Which
this
is-
just
this is
another
another
layer,
one of those
it's like
moments,
One of
right?
those moments for her, like she didn't know she's capable of doing something.
She did not know that, right? Now she does.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the powers that they have, they're just starting to understand what they are. They're not there yet.
But is the reason that you can't go into more description the fact that their understanding of this world is very naive, it's very simple?
No.
Because it seems that they don't understand much of what's happening.
Well, they're rubes, right? I mean, I hope that the description of them visiting Karanta City made it clear. They're basically the rubes, and they're like, we talked about it last time, right? They're the people from this, tiny little town in the middle of nowhere that suddenly go into the big city, right?
Yep.
So they are naive, they are immature, they're also very young, most of them. All of them really are young for their race. And so when you combine both of those together, then it leads to that.
There's a certain knowledge that you get from like just growing up from your parents and things like that about how things work in a world that you live in.
Hey Don, man, this sucks. I can't see you while you talk.
They don't seem to have that.
They have it in the context of the place they grew up in. They don't have it in the context of the big groups.
Okay.
So, you know, even if in like as the crow flies, Lavatown and Coranta City are less than 100 miles apart.
Hmm.
And in
just
terms
a
of
world
their,
apart.
like, it's worlds apart in terms of just how different they are. And then on top of all that, think about how Lavatown is structured. If you live in the shallows, you never get out of the shallows,
Yeah.
right? I mean, remember, you have to pay money to leave the shallows because they want to keep people in there and just, they don't want to get the pool people to come to other places, right? It's an
It's a
extremely,
bit of the Wizard of Oz thing.
Right.
Follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road.
I guess you could do, maybe you could do a scene where they get like, I don't know, ripped off right when they're entering the city. Like, I don't know, somebody comes up and says, I need to collect an entry tax. And then later they find out it's bullshit.
sure, I mean, that's, so this is where, Corey, I mean, the reality is like, this is where the biggest challenge I have as somebody who's trying to tell this story is what do I include in it? Right, I can add stuff to every part of the book. But the guiding principle I've been following is if you don't need to know this in order for me to progress the narrative the way that I've been interested in progressing the narrative, I'm not gonna put it in there just for flavor.
Okay, yeah, I'm not necessarily saying it, but I just, it would address the issue that Adon brought up. But there would be other ways to do that.
Perhaps, yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just, you know, it's a question of, you know, which ones to pick and where.
And I have a question for everybody. When they leave Corantha, Barak doesn't describe them discussing why they're leaving Corantha. And he doesn't discuss that they're going to Lavatown. So I didn't figure out they were going to Lavatown until they got to the bridge. Did everybody else pick that up? Was that just?
Because of the bridge,
Yeah.
because they said the crossing, so.
Right.
Bridge of the crossing, so I expected.
I did register a feeling of catching up when that happened. I was like, wait a second, where are we?
So it happens within 2 paragraphs, right?
Yeah, I mean, things are heating up around them. They have to get out.
And where would they go? So, and within 2 paragraphs, I'm telling you, they're going to Lavatown because they're going to the bridge, right?
So, but are they, but like, but right before that, they were just like, but what about our friends? I'm assuming they're gonna go and like find their friends. Right? Now they're like running away.
Yeah.
They're like,
They
whatever.
are, they are,
They were told
Okay,
in
so-
no uncertain words
Yeah.
that they gotta get out.
Yeah.
they were told that they gotta get out and
I don't know, I'm so
And
used
it's
to,
getting pretty scary, so.
Yeah.
I can't help it.
Okay.
They're also captured,
okay,
or whatever's happening.
I'm actually thinking back, perhaps there's something I can fix in the chapter before that. Because the intention is not, I'm trying, when I use, so the phrase I need to use is not city watch. I need to find a different phrase for the people who arrest them.
okay.
Because it's not Corantha City Watch, it's a different force.
Oh,
So that's a mistake.
Okay.
Yeah, what surprised me is the fact that this place that was so.
Okay, so that's the mistake I made. Thank you for bringing that up. The intention, so let me correct the story in your mind,
Okay.
because clearly that's a problem, is that it is not the City Watch, it's actually Lavatown City Watch.
So yeah, I thought it was.
The people that arrested them came from Lavatown to arrest them and
Oh,
went back.
that's why. I
Okay,
was
that
lost.
would
That-
fix
Got it.
For me immediately, yeah.
So I just need to add the words Lavatown City Watch
That
rather than
would,
just City
yeah.
Watch. That's a miss. So thank you for
Okay.
bringing that up. That's the intent. So that's why it's obvious that they're going back to Lavatown.
Okay, so
Okay.
the city didn't turn on them. It's.
Well, people in the city clearly were
Well,
involved in this in some
yeah,
way, but who
probably.
arrested them?
Yeah,
So I just didn't make that clear. So thank you for bringing that up. So they're being taken back to Lavatown. That they were
Makes sense.
arrested and taken back to Lavatown.
Thank you, everyone, again for joining us today for the reading from the book 5. Thank you to our author, Barak. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. We will be here in a couple weeks for the next installment.